The first thing we did before we even talked about specifics of like, what do we want to do with this hole, or any of that, or even really hiring an architect, is we did a series of discussions with stakeholders throughout the club. So seniors, women, men's group, board members, all the like, to really try to find out what people liked and disliked about the course. And then we mixed that with some of the strategic objectives. So I'm just going to read from my notes, but this was a document that we actually presented to the board and then later shared with the membership in terms of the core principles. So decrease water demand of the course by 25 to 30%. So that meant different turfs, but also not having irrigated turf on the perimeters. So we have natural areas. The other was to restore the course to its golden age design. Our course was designed when what was considered the golden age, kind of in the 1910s and 1920s. And the course had kind of lost that distinction. What had happened with most clubs is through the years, trees were planted. In the 80s, it was pine trees. In the 90s and 2000s, it was redwood trees. And then every year, every couple of years, there'd be a couple more bunkers added. And next thing you know, you had a course that was very single dimensional, narrow fairways, bunkers on both sides, all around the greens. So we wanted to kind of, just like if you were remodeling a house, we kind of wanted to peel back those layers and get back to the original design aesthetic of the golden era courses. Improve playability. Some of our bunkers, you needed like carabiners, like you were a mountain climber, to literally get in and out of these bunkers. And a lot of times the only way you could get out of the bunker was with a hand wedge. So we needed to get the greens back and the bunkers and the areas where it was more playable for all skill levels. And then, interestingly, one of the is an enhanced practice area. We don't have a full-length driving range at Diablo, but we made sure we designed into the new master plan practice areas, including we have a feature now where on certain days of the week, we can play using an alternate green. We can play an 18-hole, what we call new course, which plays at a par 68, but allows us, therefore, to then have a full-length driving range utilizing both the 9th and 10th fairways. So there was more to it, but those were kind of the core principles that we had to make sure. Those were the must-haves, we'll call it. An interesting thing about our course, right, is we were founded in 1914, actually sooner than that, but the current version of the club dates back to that date. And so our course, which was 9 holes, was built in the late 1910s and then nine more holes in the early 1920s. There was a lot of concern that the remodel was going to somehow lose its historic significance or its historic nature. A lot of that was just an education process of explaining to people what a golden era course really was. Golden era courses, Mackenzie's probably the best example of that. These are courses that have lots of width to them. They don't have tree-lined fairways. They have larger greens than a lot of people think. They go, oh, small greens are of the era. That's not really necessarily the case. It's providing these more options and more playability. So for a lot of times, it was just an education process. It was also explaining, like, those trees that were planted on that hole. Well, we went through our historical photographs, and guess what? They were planted in 1987, 70 years after the course was built. So a lot of the things that people thought they associated to the era were things that were actually added in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so a lot of it was just having the dialogue, showing examples, showing photographic examples of what we're trying to attain, what really depicts a golden era style of golf course.
That is a challenge. But I think you have to convince people that you'll preserve what was good in those days, but it can be improved upon. But at the same time, recognizing that it's pretty remarkable that 1913 and 1922 here, that these courses were built at all. What was the population of California in the early 1900s? It amazes me that they got built at all. In the case of your course, which I've only been to a few times, things changed over time, mostly the growth of trees, which tend to suffocate the golf course. And so you have to open up vistas, but you also have to create an opportunity for that modern member who wants to practice, who wants to have a place where he can go chip and putt and so forth and so on. The original course design was more open and, very traditional and minimalist. And so with all clubs, different members with different personalities, some more forceful than others, are able to push through what their vision is. And that's how clubs, I think, sort of go off the rails. And you get these serial fixes and cart paths, and we had these artificial lakes put in by people with no architectural input. And so that diminishes a course, and people don't realize it's diminished or who did what and when. And so I think if you can point out the historical facts about amateurs or well-intentioned people making random changes that weren't good, you can go a long way to convincing people to go back to the way things were or make them better. So the philosophy around trees, I've always said, is that no tree was ever controversial in a 5-gallon can. And so they get planted rather willy-nilly without probably professional architectural input. And then when they start to grow, first of all, from the standpoint of a superintendent, they block air and sunlight, and they make it very hard to grow grass. They make it very wet in the winter, and they probably cut off some spectacular views. What we found, it started in the 90s when the USGA was recommending to courses to thin out. And as you say, people get very emotional about trees and so forth, but they do soak up a lot of water, and then they shade the golf course. But I think people appreciate at our club now that less is more. So we've removed about 3,000 trees. And those cypress that look more majestic, they sort of frame something and they stand out on their own because there's only 2 or 3, as opposed to our fairways, some of the cypress trees were like a picket fence. And it's not conducive to golf.
Lake Merced was founded in 1922. I think that as technology changes and as times change, I think you want a golf course that's going to continue to be fun and exciting to play golf. It will still be challenging as well, but I think that embracing your history while making it fun and new is an important facet. Trees in general are problem issues for golf courses, right? Your trees are competing for water, they're creating shade on the golf course, and they create challenging growing conditions for turf around the greens, around any type of complex. So, those are challenging here. We did take out over 150 trees when we did the project.
So one of the challenges at our course was that our club was the first golf course built in Orange County. It had been built in 1924. Designed by an architect named John Duncan Dunn, who was the head pro at Los Angeles Country Club at the time. Our members that opposed the project initially said you can't mess with an old school course like that had that kind of pedigree. We did some research at the Orange County, at the Pasadena Library, and found out that 2 brothers that were members of the club had routed the course and designed the course, and John Duncan Dunn came down for one day and they paid him $500 to put his name on the course. So we used that in the debate. Okay, this is not Cypress Point that we're talking about making alterations to. In reality, our course had changed a lot over the years, and a series of decisions by club presidents or green chairmen from year to year had produced this crazy quilt golf course that did not hold together as a design. It was really inconsistent from hole to hole. And so there were a number of deficiencies that were identified, and it was a slow education process. Tree removal is one of the most hot button issues at any golf club. The way in which I look at golf courses is, if you do nothing for year after year and you think you have the same golf course from year to year, you don't. The trees are growing, the greens maybe are encroached, they get smaller. So the golf course is changing all the time. You wouldn't drive a car forever and not change the oil on the car. You have to do these things at a golf course. You have to prune back the trees, and you have to take care of it. When you open up these long views, it really changes the character of a course in a very good way. And take advantage. At your club, I've been to Sequoia, I've been on your land. You have the opportunity to open up views of the city of San Francisco that will be absolutely amazing. And I get really excited when I see the potential of that.